The heat across the Marine Corps training grounds in California felt almost unbearable as rows of exhausted recruits pushed through another brutal day of field exercises beneath the burning sun while boots slammed into dirt and instructors barked commands loud enough to shake the confidence out of anyone weak enough to hesitate because Marine training was never designed to be fair or comfortable and nobody represented that reality, more than Staff Sergeant Ethan Cole, whose reputation alone terrified new recruits before they even arrived at boot camp, since Cole was known across the base as a man who never smiled, never lowered standards, and never tolerated excuses after serving multiple combat tours overseas that hardened him into the kind of instructor recruits whispered about in fear late at night inside the barracks. While among the newest platoon was Private Daniel Reyes, a quiet 19-year-old recruit from San Antonio who arrived carrying far more weight than the overloaded backpack strapped to his shoulders because only 6 months earlier Daniel had buried his mother after a long battle with cancer, leaving him completely alone except for a younger sister living with relatives. While joining the Marines became his desperate attempt to build a future strong enough to support what remained of his broken family. But from the very beginning Daniel struggled constantly during training as the endless physical punishment slowly destroyed his body while sleepless nights and buried grief consumed whatever strength he had left, and despite pushing himself harder every day he remained the slowest runner, the weakest climber, and the recruit most instructors quietly expected to fail before graduation. While Staff Sergeant Cole seemed especially relentless toward him, often screaming directly into Daniel's face during exercises demanding more effort than the exhausted young man looked physically capable of giving, and the other recruits slowly became convinced Cole hated him. Because no matter how hard Daniel pushed, it was never enough until the final week of training arrived, bringing the infamous 72-hour field endurance exercise where recruits crossed miles of rough mountain terrain carrying heavy gear with almost no sleep while surviving brutal physical and mental exhaustion designed to break anyone unworthy of earning the Marine title. And somewhere deep into the second night Daniel's body finally began shutting down as dehydration, exhaustion, and stress blurred his vision while sharp pain spread through his legs with every step. Yet he refused to quit because he could already hear his late mother's voice in his mind begging him not to give up now after everything he had survived. And as the platoon climbed a steep rocky ridge in complete darkness Daniel suddenly collapsed hard into the dirt, unable to stand again, while several instructors immediately ordered medics forward believing the young recruit was finished, and one officer quietly muttered that Reyes should have been removed from training weeks ago. But before anyone could officially pull him from the exercise, Staff Sergeant Cole stepped forward, staring silently down at the trembling, exhausted recruit struggling to breathe in the cold mountain air. And for several long seconds nobody spoke because everyone expected Cole to finally end Daniel's training right there. But instead the feared Marine instructor did something that shocked the entire platoon, because without saying a word, Cole removed Daniel's overloaded pack from his shoulders and lifted it onto his own back, instantly violating one of the strictest rules in Marine training, where instructors were forbidden from physically assisting recruits during endurance exercises. And several Marines nearby stared in disbelief as Cole looked directly at Daniel and growled only 4 words through the darkness: "You are not quitting," before forcing the exhausted recruit back onto his feet and continuing the march beside him through the freezing night, while whispers spread through the platoon because nobody had ever seen Staff Sergeant Cole help anyone before. And mile after mile the hardened instructor stayed beside Daniel, pushing him forward every time his legs nearly failed, until finally just before sunrise the platoon reached the final checkpoint, where Daniel collapsed again, completely spent but still conscious, while medics rushed toward him and the recruits stood silently watching Staff Sergeant Cole remove Daniel's pack from his own shoulders with visible exhaustion in his face, because the instructor had carried extra weight across miles of mountain terrain despite regulations that could easily end his career if reported. And later that morning, when Daniel woke inside the medical tent, he found Cole sitting quietly outside alone drinking black coffee, while the exhausted recruit struggled to understand why the toughest instructor on the entire base risked everything for someone everyone else had already given up on. And after a long silence Cole finally spoke without looking at him, explaining that years earlier during combat he once lost a young Marine who stopped believing in himself during the worst possible moment, and ever since then Cole swore he would never again stand by while someone willing to fight simply needed another person to carry part of the weight. And weeks later, when Daniel Reyes finally graduated as a United States Marine, standing proudly beside his platoon, he searched the crowd until he spotted Staff Sergeant Cole watching silently from the back of the ceremony while For the first time since training began, the feared instructor gave the smallest, almost invisible nod of respect, and in that moment Daniel realized true strength was never about never falling but about refusing to leave someone behind when they no longer had the strength to stand alone.